welcome to The Skinny for Friday, June 6th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined by my colleague Ray Roa, the creative loafing editor-in-chief. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Mitch. Happy to be here.
Happy to see you here. And before we get into the show, we wanted to say we made our goal, our
yes,
financial
we
goal
had
last week.
a last-minute donor with that really pushed us over the edge in a huge way. And I don't know, you can't really express the relief and just how grateful we are. And it does feel good to know that this kind of programming matters and that the news block really matters to you, especially on Friday.
Yeah,
here.
Again, many of you listened last week. Of course, we were fundraising, the summer fundraising drive for WMNF, and when we ended the show at 12 noon, we were several $100s short. But in fact, we did make it, and I was thrilled. And Ray sent me a text about 12:15 last Friday. So thank you to our listeners. Okay, so we got a really exciting show for you this morning. Coming up, we'll be talking about transportation and transit in Tampa. Always a perennial subject that I've been discussing with you for 25 years since I moved here. But first, we're going to get back into talking. There's a little bit of discussion in the previous show about the state legislature in Tallahassee, and we're going to get into that for this first half hour. Joining us via Zoom right now is Orlando Democratic State Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith. Good morning, Senator Smith.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. And for our listeners, if they're not familiar with Carlos Guillermo Smith, he has been in the legislature, I guess, actually as a staffer for over a decade. Carlos was elected in 2016 as a member of the House of Representatives up till 2022. Then he came back and was elected last year to the Senate. He's still a senior advisor with Equality Florida, the state's leading LGBTQ plus group, and has been involved with that organization for a decade. And I was
Yes, and happy Pride. I have to jump in and say that while we're sharing that information.
I want to mention Pride later on here. And also, I didn't know this. I was looking at your bio this morning. You actually go back as a legislative aide, right? 2011, 2012. So you've got a lot of experience there in Tallahassee.
I do, but I didn't start in politics, Mitch. It's funny, even though I was legislative staff before I decided to take the plunge myself and run for public office. I used to manage a Men's Warehouse store for like 8 years. I was a retail manager, and I was kind of doing all of the work out there in the retail field, so to speak. But I was inspired by President Obama's election to kind of get involved in grassroots organizing and volunteerism and pushing for healthcare reform. And I kind of caught the political bug after that. Who knew, right?
Makes sense. He is one of the best dressed members.
Did you ever meet George Zimmer, of course, at the Men's Warehouse?
You're too kind. You are too kind. I did. I met George several times. Actually, right. He was a great example of corporate responsibility. And what I mean by that is, I worked for the Men's Warehouse when we actually were going through the Great Recession.
Yeah.
And he fought his board of directors at the time to make sure that increases in healthcare contributions for employees did not have to happen, even though costs were increasing. It was the corporation that absorbed all of those healthcare costs on our behalf, so we didn't have to see rising costs. I know that's not what I came to talk to you here about, but you brought him up.
Yes, I did.
Kind of elicited some
I remember
feelings.
Those commercials, for the Men's Warehouse. Okay, Carlos, so again, you guys are taking a break today in Tallahassee, but the session that won't end continues on here. We know that basically
95, 96 days into session. Who's counting at this point?
So I know there's a quote-unquote framework for a deal ultimately with the budget, and of course we're talking a lot about these tax cuts, and I believe right now the number is $2.25 billion in recurring tax cuts, and that will include eliminating the tax on business rents and exempting some items from sales tax. Something that's come up in the last few days or this week has been this idea the legislature wants to set aside $1.5 billion over the next 2 years to bolster what they call the Budget Stabilization Fund, or BSF, which ultimately would require a ballot measure actually in 2026. Also yesterday, we heard both Senate President Albritton and Speaker Perez talk to the press. And it was interesting. Senate President Albritton talked about the fact that federal funding makes up a third of the state budget the last year. And he said, obviously that the state shouldn't expect to receive that same level. And of course, these comments come as Congress considers hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts to Medicaid and food assistance over the next decade. Interesting, Senator Smith, because I know, basically we're really the reconciliation bill, the big, beautiful bill that's talk in Washington right now. I get that, I was up there with you in Tallahassee during the regular session. We didn't really know everything that was going on with that. But now that we kind of do, we're really seeing asking with that bill again, and it may not pass the way it's written right now, but it's going to ask a lot of the states ultimately if that happens, specifically on SNAP, the food stamp program. I think it's asking for the states to really get involved more than they ever have in that, or they don't have to continue to fund that. And again, we really haven't had the discussion up in Tallahassee on that, but that is something that is, again, we'll see where this bill in Washington falls. But so I guess the question first is, when you talk so much, but we've heard so much about, tax cuts, can the state really afford to do that?
Well, the reality is that we're facing what appeared to be a really complicated policy proposal as part of the budget session. You mentioned it just now. That was the Budget Stabilization Fund. And by the way, talking about this Budget Stabilization Fund that would be put in front of voters is like the equivalent of just watching paint dry. I mean, it is not the sexiest topic. It is extremely boring, but also extremely impactful on the state's ability to actually meet the current needs of the residents of our state, of the hardworking families of our state. First, you mentioned the so-called big, beautiful bill, which is really an ugly bill that is going to not only be the largest cut to Medicaid that we've seen in the history of the United States. It means 13 or 14 million people are going to get pushed off of healthcare. It means taking away benefits for not only seniors and nursing homes, but also kids and low-income families. And so as a result of that growing storm in DC and the possibility of a Trump imposed recession, whether it be from tariffs or from eliminating a government position and firing people from their jobs in order to fund tax cuts for billionaires and for large corporations, that may cause some kind of impact on Florida's ability to pay our bills, is what they're telling us. So first and foremost, I just want to point out that they seem to be admitting that some Trump-imposed recession may be coming. But at the same time, what they're doing is the opposite of what we should be doing as a state. What we should be doing is making sure that we protect some of these critical government services and addressing some of these critical needs and protecting these programs, and in fact, maybe even beefing them up, because we know people are going to rely on them even more than they do right now. Talking about watching the paint dry, Mitch, what we're talking about is this proposal, this budget stabilization fund, where they basically want to increase the state's budget reserves from a maximum of 10%, which is what we have right now. Florida does have the most robust budget reserves or savings account, if you will, in the entire nation. We've got around $4 billion or so in what we call a rainy day fund. That is maxed out at 10% of revenue collections to the state, and they want to boost that to 25%, which basically means they would be setting aside billions of dollars that we need to fund critical services at a time when the need for those services is only going to increase. And they're acting like it's surplus money, but It's not surplus money. A surplus is what remains when you meet all of your needs and your obligations. But our obligations are not met, Mitch.
Yeah, indeed. Again, if you're just tuning in right now, we're speaking with State Senator Guillermo Smith from Orlando, Democrat, talking about the state legislative session that is still going on right now. I want to talk about what happened this week. I guess I don't know where the meeting was at, but the state Board of Governors, Education Board of Governors, they rejected this week Santa Ono, who, as the University of Florida's prospective president, in what some consider was a shocking move that was sparked by conservative outrage over support of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives while leading the University of Michigan, And I don't know if you saw any of the Senator Smith. I watched a little bit of it. It was quite unusual, I would say. I mean, it was really not about education. It was about his former policies on DEI, which, of course, had become a bête noire with conservatives everywhere now. And I guess it seemed a lot of people think this, whatever position you stand on this, it was kind of a debacle. And now we don't know what the flagship university of Florida, where they're going to get their next president. What were your thoughts about how that went down?
Well, it was really embarrassing, if I'm being honest, for our state that politics was the reason why we can't have a university president at the University of Florida, which, as you just mentioned, is the flagship higher education institution as it relates to public universities in our state. We can't let this institution go for that long without a president. And for all intents and purposes, although the candidate wasn't the perfect candidate, he was an academic who had experience in higher education. And yet, so many of these political appointees, all conservatives for the most part, decided that they were going to block his appointment, which, by the way, was unanimous by the Board of Trustees at the University of Florida. These are the folks that are actually on the ground and are tasked with, leading that higher education institution. And they saw fit to appoint him to be the university president unanimously because of his education experience and because of his knowledge and being able to actually be an academic who can lead a flagship institution like UF. And instead politics got in the way. It is rather bizarre. Like, can we just take a deep breath and percolate on the fact that because as a university president, he valued diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is an extremely popular thing until Republicans decided that they were going to turn it into this toxic, divisive topic. I mean, a year ago, Mitch, every Fortune 100 company in the nation had a department dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Republicans have decided to make this their number one issue for some reason. And they complain about cancel culture, and yet they just canceled this qualified candidate to lead the University of Florida because he dared to used to be someone who would encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion on our campus communities, which, by the way, makes our community stronger. It's really a sad day in Florida politics, in my opinion.
Again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. Mitch Perry with Ray Rowe. We're speaking with State Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith. Senator Smith, you are very much opposed to this, as of now, planned bear hunt that the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission approved of last month in a 4-1 vote in Ocala. The rule proposals will be discussed in August, and the hunt would take place later this year. Tell us, I certainly understand why you're against this. I think a lot of folks are. It was a very interesting meeting when they had that a couple weeks ago. So you're leading an organized opposition against this.
Well, that's right. It's really unfortunate that the Florida Wildlife Commission has decided to push this through, allow another bear hunt in the state of Florida after the last bear hunt in 2015 was an absolute disaster. It was a massacre. Back then in 2015, they allowed for a bear hunt and officials had to stop it within 48 hours because they saw the slaughter of 300 black bears in just 2 days, including bears that were nursing mothers. By the way, 300 bears were killed in 2 days, and in some areas of the state that exceeded the caps that they had put on the previous bear hunt. And so people are obviously opposed to the idea that we're going to do this again. And yet the bear hunt rules that the Florida Wildlife Commission has put forward, if you want to call them that, are lax, to say the very least. I mean, they're saying that you can use feeding stations to lure bears in close. You can deploy packs of dogs to chase bears down. You can shoot bears with bows and arrows, which is really just going to cause needless pain and suffering for black bears, and kill them even in their dens, even while there's nursing cubs nearby. So we started a letter writing campaign to Governor DeSantis, not because he sits on the board of the Florida Wildlife Commission. He doesn't, but he appoints those members of the Florida Wildlife Commission, and his, although he's kind of a lame duck governor, if you will, if he came out in opposition to this bear hunt, that would make a big impact, and it would likely stop it from happening. So we're encouraging folks to reach out to Governor DeSantis to express their opposition. And by the way, we're taking other forms, or we've taken other forms of concrete action to stop this bear hunt, Mitch. When I was here earlier in the legislative session as a senator, I opposed the confirmation of FWC Chair Rodney Barreto. He is someone who was already pushing for the bear hunt, and that was one of the reasons why I opposed this nomination. I pulled him from a group of, 200 appointees from the governor on the Senate floor to try to derail that confirmation in the Florida Senate. We ultimately were not successful, but we're going to continue that effort because this is just cruel and inhumane, and it's not. It's certainly not about wildlife control, as FWC is putting it.
As you mentioned, this is, of course, Pride Month, and we should note that here in the Bay Area, Pride flags are still being allowed to be displayed by local governments around the state. They did it in St. Petersburg last week. I believe they did it in Orlando earlier this week. Carlos, as I know, Equality Florida made had a big press conference and a big press release after the session ended. Very happy about the fact that none of these so-called culture war bills really got over the finish line this year in Tallahassee. But there were certainly some that they were trying to get through. There was specifically SB 440, which is sponsored by Ocala Republican Stan McClain, which said that an employee in a public workplace may not be required to refer to another person using that person's preferred pronouns if such pronouns didn't correspond to that person's sex at birth. It got into definitely issues like that.
How absurd.
Yeah. And it did kind of, again, and also there was a bill, again, that's been up the last 3 years about flags, which doesn't specifically mention any flags, but we know was going after pride flags and Black Lives Matter flags. So is it, what do you think the legislature is on this? I mean, of course, so much has been done already, right, in the last few years when it comes to the issues with the LGBTQ community, but your thoughts about...
To the extreme.
Yeah.
It's exhausting, Mitch. Look, the last several years, the legislature has obsessed over doing things like regulating pronouns in our schools and in government workplaces. How silly! Like, as if we don't have major problems to solve, that we want the legislature to pass laws to regulate pronouns and drag queens and transgender folks being able to access life-saving care and don't say gay or trans. All of this stuff is not only distracting us from solving real problems, it's actually having a negative impact on the LGBT community that lives here in the state. Many folks already left the state of Florida because they didn't feel safe and they did not feel welcome here. I am a proud, born and raised Floridian. I'm a proud gay man. I live in Orlando with my husband, Jarek, and we are fortunate and privileged to be able to be our authentic selves and live out loud, which is what celebrating Pride is all about. It's being proud of who you are and celebrating who you are and remembering certainly the Stonewall riots that basically happened in New York City many decades ago that kind of started the LGBTQ rights movement. But what we saw in this legislative session here was that all anti-LGBTQ proposals that were brought forward in the Florida legislature did not pass. They were all stopped or neutralized. And I think the reason why is because advocacy matters, because people power matters, because every time one of those bills was heard in committee, and while they didn't pass, many of them were heard and were voted on in committees, masses of people showed up and applied public pressure to say that these bills needed to be stopped, that they were bad policy, that they were attacking people's fundamental rights, and that we should focus on solving important problems in our state, like rising costs and rising property insurance. I think that lawmakers in the majority party, certainly Republicans, I think their appetite for these types of culture wars perhaps is starting to wane, which is a good thing, but also they understand there's going to be major public opposition anytime they bring these bills forward. So I'm glad that we were able to stop every anti-LGBTQ bill. And for Pride Month, I think people need to raise their flags higher and go to every Pride event that they can, because once again, in the year 2025, raising that flag is a act of political resistance, which is much needed right now.
Senator Smith, let me ask you a little bit about that internal political resistance within movements, right? Oftentimes it feels like the left is fighting amongst itself, all these other things. And you're up there in Tallahassee trying to just fight the GOP. Here in St. Pete Pride, there's a group that's kind of protested or maybe spoken out against the so-called pink washing of Pride. Obviously, Prides are expensive. They're sponsors and things like that. But they would like them to, not take money from people connected to weapons manufacturers or have a more outspoken tone on what's going on in the Middle East. What do you say to progressive people like that, within the left and within the progressive sects of the party as they try to advance Pride and move away and move towards more progressive things?
Well, I think we need to remember what LGBTQ Pride is all about. LGBTQ Pride is about celebrating the LGBTQ community. It's about inclusion. And there's also a diverse set of views and perspectives about what's happening in the Middle East and what is happening in Gaza within the LGBTQ community. I think people should continue to stand up for what they believe in. And I think that nonviolent resistance and nonviolent advocacy is really important in any manner that folks want to participate in. But I also think LGBT Pride should be about LGBTQ Pride.
Again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Skinny here on WMNF. Mitch Perry, Ray Rowe. We're speaking to State Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith, a Democrat from Orlando. I have a few more minutes with him. I'm going to get as many questions as I can in. We have a listener who wants to just get your take on the whole Hope Florida scandal, which right now seems to be, I don't know, there's apparently, Senator Smith, an investigation, maybe. I mean, I guess officially there is. That's been reported up in the Northern Florida district there, but I'm not sure how intent that's going to be. It definitely seems to be politically damaging to Governor DeSantis. Your take on all that?
Well, this is a growing scandal because the more we find out about what happened with the Hope Florida and the $10 million of taxpayer money that was stolen from taxpayers and stolen from Medicaid recipients, the more we understand that an investigation needs to continue because it appears that crimes were committed. For those who don't know, the Medicaid provider Centene basically overcharged the state of Florida, and there was a settlement reached with the state of Florida that they owed us $67 million of taxpayer money because of that overbilling. Apparently, the governor's staff and his team decided that they were going to secretly ask Centene to send the state of Florida $57 million of that money and send another $10 million of that money, the remaining balance, to Casey DeSantis's charity, the Hope Florida Foundation. But the biggest scandal isn't that they necessarily did this without the authority or permission of the Florida legislature, which is maybe a crime. It also is what is very scandalous is what happened to this money after it was sent to Hope Florida. It was laundered and sent to third-party dark money groups and political action committees to be spent on political advertisements against Amendment 3. So I think someone needs to go to prison over this because it's very clear that crimes were committed. I am glad that the Florida House took their investigation as far as they could, but accountability should be demanded on this scandal. We need to get that $10 million of taxpayer money back, and folks need to be held accountable for the crimes they committed. And I believe those folks, I don't want to unname anyone when I'm saying this. It appears that our unelected Attorney General, James Uthmeyer, is at the center of this scandal, which is extremely concerning, to say the least, considering he is the state's top law enforcement official.
Yeah, he's also considered to be contempt of court down in South Florida for not listening to a federal judge regarding the immigration law.
It's total lawlessness, Mitch, from the party that purports to be the party of law and order.
Well, on that, Senator Smith, about how that money went to the group Keep Florida Clean, which Uthmeyer was running, it reminds me of what happened, of course, last fall, where the governor used taxpayer funds to use for PSAs and basically campaign against Amendment 3, the cannabis constitutional amendment, which would, of course, legalize that. And I know you had filed a bill this year to make sure that would ever happen again. I don't think it should have happened last year. I think that was against the law last year. But nevertheless, now that provision is actually tucked inside inside the very controversial bill that is going to make it much harder to pass citizen-led constitutional amendments. I know you don't like that bill at all, but are you at least okay with the fact that that provision is inside that bill?
Well, the fact that we have a few sentence provision in an otherwise very impactful and very bad bill that takes away the constitutional rights of all Floridians to be able to petition their government to change the Constitution, to engage in direct democracy is not really a consolation at this point. We could have done that in any bill. It was the right thing to do to prohibit the spending of public dollars and public resources for political campaigns. And yes, that citizen-led amendment process that was attacked through legislation that the Florida legislature brought forward this cycle is being challenged in court. And I'm hopeful that this law can be struck down as the unconstitutional law that it is, that makes it nearly impossible for citizens to be able to gather enough petitions to get a question on the ballot to change the Constitution, like we did with Amendment 4 to overturn the 6-week abortion ban in our state, which fell just short of the required 60%, or like we've done for so many other things, like legalizing medical cannabis and raising our state's minimum wage to a living wage of $15 per hour. These are all things that were done through the citizen-led amendment process, which the Republicans who control the supermajority in the legislature want to stop moving forward. You know, the right response, Mitch, to the fact that nearly 60% of Floridians, just short of the 60% threshold that was needed to pass a constitutional amendment, not only wanted legal weed for responsible adult use, but they also wanted to overturn the 6-week extreme abortion ban. That's a majority of Floridians, a clear majority of Floridians, including many Republican voters, a majority of them. The legislature should have heard their message loud and clear that they want the legislature to undo some of these extreme restrictions on a woman's right to choose, that they want the legislature to enact some sort of legal cannabis, even if the proposal that was on the ballot last year might not have been the perfect solution to go ahead and do that. And rather than listen, rather than hear what the voters told us in November of 2024, the legislature decided that they wanted to silence the ability of voters to speak through the Constitution citizen-led amendment process moving forward, which I think is an attack certainly on direct democracy and is something that we should continue fighting in the courts.
I just have two more questions for you, Senator. One is, and this is a question my colleague from the Florida Phoenix, Christine Sexton, wanted me to ask you, and that's regarding Bill HB 1103 that makes changes to how the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, or APD, operates. Would require, among other things, for it to become more transparent about the $1 billion Medicaid budget it administers. And she also sent me this question I want to ask to you too as well. And to add on to that, she says there are also concerns that the legislature may be funneling money for the new managed care program and not spending enough to increase the workforce wages for the people in the Medicaid iBudget program. Are they doing enough to fortify iBudget workforce?
Well, we're not doing enough. And the evidence that I'll provide to prove it is that Florida still has a wait list of people living with disabilities who are eligible to receive services to live and work in their communities. The wait list is 22,000 people long. 22,000 people with disabilities in Florida who need iBudget Medicaid waiver services to live and work in their communities are on years-long waiting lists. 40% of them have been on waiting lists for more than 10 years, and many folks will die while on the waiting list, as they already have. While managed care is not the ideal solution to getting these folks enrolled in the services that they need because it is substandard care, it's at least moving us in some direction where folks are getting some of the services that we need. But here's what we need to do. We need to increase reimbursement for those providers of these services. Often those services are personal supports, folks that can help people with disabilities with daily life activities, help them get to and from work or from the grocery store so that they can earn that income and be self-sufficient. But I'll tell you one other thing that we've been working on that will continue in the next legislative session, and that is a Medicaid buy-in program for people with disabilities, which our state desperately needs. That means that folks can buy into the Medicaid program, people with disabilities. We can remove the income caps on those people with disabilities because currently too many folks living with disabilities in Florida have to choose between getting a job or receiving a job promotion with a higher salary or getting the services that they need through Medicaid budget waiver. I think that that's wrong. We need to be able to remove those income caps so people can get the services that they need through Medicaid and be able to be self-sufficient with a higher income. We're going to continue advocating for those reforms.
And last question for you. I know, of course, we all know that the Democrats are in the super minority in both the House and Senate. In the state Senate, which you joined last year, you began the session, we have 12 members. And then, of course, tragically, you lost your colleague and friend, former Senator Geraldine Thompson. She tragically died just a few weeks before the session began. And then right before the session ended, about 8 days before the session ended, the official day was supposed to end, your leader in the Senate at the time, Jason Pizzo, quit the Democratic Party. So now the Democrats only have 10 members in the 40-member chamber. What has that been like? I know when you were in the House, obviously, you were in the part of the minority there. But obviously, it's not a breaking news that it's been tough times for Florida Democrats. But just tell us how it went for you this past session with that super minority status in the state Senate.
Sure. Well, it has been tough times for Florida Democrats. There's no question about that. But I think one thing we can all agree on is that intra-party feuds and intra-party turmoil is not something that is unique to the Democratic Party. The reason why some of our drama was not given as much attention as maybe it could have is because the entire legislative session got taken over by Republican infighting between the governor and the Republican House Speaker and this intra-party feud that was happening over on the Republican side. So I suppose I'm grateful for that because it also gave Democrats like myself in the super minority amidst all of this chaos from the GOP infighting, the opportunity to come in and not only get many of my community projects funded, which I know we're still in the budget process and I'm doing right now. I have a number of projects in my community that we have secured funding for on both sides, but it also gave Democrats like myself the opportunity to get things done and actually pass policy that can improve people's lives quietly. You know, last week, just a couple of weeks ago, the governor signed one of my bills into law, which would basically require EpiPen training in our public schools in K-8 across the state to save student lives, students that have allergic anaphylactic responses. Now we know that we're going to have school personnel trained not only during school, but before school and after school to be able to administer an emergency EpiPen to students who have those types of allergic reactions. It's not often that you see Democrats in the super minority get bills passed and signed into law as I did, but that is one of the silver linings that came from this 2025 unforgettable session, that's for sure.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Carlos Guillermo Smith, he's a state senator from the Orlando area, Democrat, and he spent the last half hour with us. So we really appreciate your time, Senator Smith. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Smith.
Thanks.
Happy
Follow
Pride
me
Month.
at Carlos G. Smith. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith. And now, Ray Rowe, we're going to go talk about transit and transportation here in the Tampa Bay area.
Yeah, Mitch, I think you and I both drove our cars here.
Yeah.
I was at the Tampa Downtown Partnership's State of Downtown Forum last month, and one of the speakers said Tampa is supposed to be a 20-minute town, meaning you can commute across it in 20 minutes. I've heard some people say it takes an hour just to get from Tampa to Tampa, right? So transit, as you mentioned at the top of the show, has been something we've talked about here on this radio station, the community, seeming like forever. Oftentimes a sore subject, whether we're talking about road diets, our relationship with FDOT, public transit. You know, these numbers aren't exactly great. Our city is growing, the population's going up, property and real estate values go up. But we don't rank well when it comes to cost of living or household income, and definitely transit. The Tampa Bay Partnership does a State of the Region report. Its latest figures tell us that we're 19th in the country when it comes to ridership per capita at 7 to 6%, and we're also 20th when it comes to transit vehicle revenue miles per capita, basically meaning the availability of these vehicles to move us around. And moreover, it's not uncommon knowledge to know that HART is severely underfunded with an operating budget that's similar to areas with far fewer residents. So transit is this problem, but there is a local group advocating for the improvement and expansion of transit in the Bay Area. The group is rider-centric, but it also aims to empower leadership to invest in transit. It's called Transit Now Tampa Bay, and they regularly hold meetings and forums where they discuss these ideas and action items. Tonight, actually, it will host a ride-along on HART's Route 1, which we'll get into. And we're joined now on the skinny by one of Transit Now Tampa Bay's co-founders, Dana Lazarus. Dana, are you there?
Hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us. Dana is an AICP certified urban planner here in Tampa. She sits on the board of Sunshine Citizens and has been a member of the Hillsborough TPO's Citizen Advisory Committee since 2017. So this next 20 minutes here, we want to talk about, there's so many things to talk about. A millage, Route 1, the ferry, Brightline, the streetcar, 275. But there's this renewed energy, Dana, around your group. And for some reason, in my eyes, it felt like a new group. But the Facebook page has been around since 2017, if we're believing Mark Zuckerberg here.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about the history of Transit Now Tampa Bay and who its members are?
Absolutely. We were founded in 2017, around the time of the Stop TBX fight. There was a lot of energy around stopping the things that we don't want, which is endless highway widening, roadway widening that just leads to induced demand. As a certified urban planner, we know these things through data of what actually makes a city functional. And so we formed Transit Now Tampa Bay, myself and Kate Connolly and some others, to provide a space, a forum for people that have a vision and want to see something better here in Hillsborough County and Tampa and beyond. That includes public transit. And so we started as a discussion space on Facebook in 2017, back when I would say Facebook was a little more relevant. But we built up our membership to over 900 members and have daily posts on that Facebook group where people share news and ideas and best practices about how do we get public transit here in Tampa. And so this renewed energy that you're seeing is because it's a couple things, but when we decided to really kick off action over the last couple years, we're basically 2 for 2 in terms of wins at this point. Maybe 3 for 3 if you count the ferry grant being transferred to PSTA, which we advocated for recently. But last year, we wanted to basically tell the city of Tampa that public transit should be a city priority and that we need to put our money where our mouth is and fund it. And so that is when we went to Tampa City Council and advocated to make Route 1 fare free as a pilot program and increase the frequency from 30 minutes. And this is our most popular route in the county, and it was a 30-minute frequency. So the city of Tampa funded that to become a 15-minute frequency for 1 year. So that was our first win. And then our second win was recently, we're focused on the long term, the big picture. What is our dedicated funding source for HART to make sure that we can meet our needs? And we advocated to the HART board to change their charter to allow up to a $1 million property tax to fund HART. So we are just on a roll.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Hillsborough County is a community that in 2018 voted to tax itself 1% on sales tax for better transit. That tax collected roughly $569 million before the Florida Supreme Court eventually sided with a Hillsborough County Commissioner, Stacy White, who filed a lawsuit against 10 defendants, including the city, Temple Terrace, Plant City, HART, basically saying that the tax was unenforceable. That money is now being split between road resurfacing projects to the tune of almost $260 million. There's legal fees, refunds to taxpayers that started going out. And then, so last month, as you mentioned with the millage, the agency, HART, listened to the community, considered changing this millage, which hasn't been increased since the 70s, because if you believe Temple Terrace Councilman Gil Schizler, I believe I'm pronouncing the name right, HART is at this crossroads. If it doesn't figure out additional funding by January 2028, it's looking at significant cuts, rollbacks, cuts in service, and so forth. So, it also needs a heavy maintenance facility. The current one is almost half a century old, but this $500,000, it passed. Luis Vieira, who's the HART board chair, seemed surprised when it happened. I heard him utter, "I'll be damned," when that happened. The next step is for the board to ratify this millage increase to $500,000 to full mill. And anybody that pays property taxes kind of knows that means it goes from 50 cents per 1,000 assessed property value to $1. And if that happens, voters, everybody listening, at least in Hillsborough County, could see this on the ballot in November 2026. There's a lot of compelling arguments for this. I don't know if we want to get into that, but what is the next step for you now, Transit Now Tampa Bay, and really at the community at large when it comes to this millage? It's like we've been here before. Are we going to do this again?
Yeah. Well, raising the millage is a different approach than a sales tax. I personally think we need both. Looking at our funding deficit, our not deficit, but how much we need to be competitive, to have a basic level of service for our bus system comparatively. I mean, so Hillsborough County and Pinellas County are two of the only counties in the state of Florida that fund our bus system through a millage. And Pinellas County's millage is about 0.73, while ours, it was actually 0.46 in 1979 and was only raised very slightly to 0.5. So we've basically been at a $500,000 since 1979. So we're looking at this increase for the millage specifically because that is the specific dedicated method to funding a bus system that we have chosen and that it has been for a long time. And so we think that this is popular. To be honest, we think that we can find common ground across the entire political spectrum, everybody from the riders to the business owners. Public transit is something that we really need. And this is the only specific methodology we have to pay for it. And a government exists to do for people what they can't do for themselves. You can't have your own army. The government has to supply that. So the government has to supply public transit to make moving around the area feasible and effective. Many, many people can't afford a car or they're disadvantaged when it comes to car driving or ownership in some capacity. On the other side, you have employers who have workers, and this is how you get your workforce to work. So it really benefits everybody. One of my favorite quotes is that what's necessary for some is beneficial for everybody. So public transit is both necessary for survival for our most vulnerable as much as it is a tool for smart economic growth. And so our next step is what we're really all about as Transit Now is being very grassroots and getting people to unite around this thing that we all agree is so desperately needed. And we need the city of Tampa, the city of Temple Terrace, and the Board of County Commission to simply allow HART to put this on the ballot. So there will be some agenda items coming up where they will have those votes, and we'll be showing up, raising our voices, and we've done really well with that so far. I mean, it's actually not hard. We had one event, actually, speaking of Pride, Happy Pride, we tabled at Pride. It was a 5-hour event, and we got over 500 signatures on a petition that we put out that is just generally saying, I want to increase funds for HART. In just one day, over 500 signatures. And then when advocating to the HART board about the millage increase, we got over 250 emails sent to the HART board in support of that in only 4 days. I mean, this is something people really want. It's not a heavy lift. This organization is is here as an anchor point for people to come together, put our voices together, and advocate for what we really want, which is better transit, more buses.
And obviously, transit's a hot topic. The phone is already ringing here. David in Tampa is on the line with us here.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, let's go to David. Okay, David, you're on with WMNF.
Oh, hey. I just wanted to say I've really liked it since the number one bus has gone free fare. And I live in Seminole Heights. I live pretty close to number one line, so I've been riding it pretty regularly. But I would love to see like an east-west line, like number 34 that covers Hillsborough Avenue, be free as well. Because I kind of think of those as like the spines of Tampa, east and west axis kind of thing. I was wondering if that would be a possibility. And one other thing I want to mention, when I was in Denver a couple of years ago for vacation, the whole bus system there was free of charge for summer, and it was to help cut down on car pollution, But I wonder if we could do something like that here. I would love to see something like that in Tampa.
Thanks for the call, David. Dana, you're deeply involved with elected officials, and you're talking about transit all the time. Have you heard anything about an appetite to find some money to fund, something going east-west, as David described?
Absolutely. Actually, yes, I'm nodding profusely. Yes. We, Transit Now Tampa Bay, we are approaching our advocacy for public transit as both kind of a long-term fix. What is the dedicated funding source that we're going to make up the extra $200 million or $100 million that HART needs every year, which is a big push, again, for the millage, possibly another sales tax. That was very popular. But we're also looking at short-term solutions. What can our local governments or even philanthropists, where can we get money for some quicker wins, some immediate needs with the Route 1? Yes, it's north-south. It's the most popular route. So that was, and it's also possibly a future BRT route. Yes. So that was a great one. But where we are now looking at, okay, so how do we expand this program? And we are looking at an east-west. Yeah, so we're looking at possibly a route that goes to the airport, because the airport, the 10 as well. Mm-hmm. We're looking at some of these routes that are east-west and connect people to the airport, which has been a hot topic. So thank you for your feedback on the routes that we should consider, because we're going to look at all of them and come up with some short-term demands.
And we have another call here from Mike in Sarasota.
Indeed we do. Mike, you're on the skinny.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. I work in transportation advocacy, so I did some research here in Sarasota County years ago about mass transit, and I discovered that 75% of the budget for mass transit in Sarasota County is sponsored by the feds. And at the time, there was somewhere around there's somewhere in between $20 and $30 million, the federal split was. Also, interestingly, I took a look at the American Community Survey, which is sponsored by the Census, U.S. Census, and discovered that the percentage of people commuting to work by transit was 0.5%, half of 1%, and while the percentage of people commuting by walking was 0.7%, and people commuting by bicycle was 0.8%. So my question for your guest is, how much money, well, what is the split in Fed and local for HART in terms of percentage and in terms of real dollars? And what percentage of people commute by mass transit today in Hillsborough County?
Thanks, Mike. Dana, anything to say to that?
Those are great data questions. So HART puts out an annual plan and does a major update every 4 years or so of the Transportation Development Plan, or TDP, and all of those facts and figures are in there. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but what I will say is that local funding for public transit is absolutely vital. All of the cities that we think of in the United States that have amazing public transit have multiple local funding sources in order to provide that level of service to the people.
Yeah, the operating budget at heart for 2025 is just north of $117 million.
Yeah, and speaking of local funding, we've got, let's see here, David writing in via email. He writes, it's worth mentioning that the same commissioner, and he's talking about Hillsborough County here, Commissioner Josh Wastel, a Republican, that didn't want us voting on the school millage or CIT, is saying this transportation millage will be dead at the county. His idea, I'm again reading from David's email, his idea is to have Elon Musk-type luxury mini transports. Unincorporated Hillsborough residents should realize transit helps us all. Dave from North Tampa. What do you think about that, Dan?
Yeah, can we even invoke Elon Musk yet? I know.
Let's go back to Josh Wastel, though.
Yeah, Wastel has been somebody who's been opposed to some of these arguments that you've brought to the county commission. Have you gotten anywhere with Wastel as far as your group goes and your meetings with him?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's fair for Josh to try to speak on behalf of the entire county commission when he's, tries to say that they won't vote a certain way. That's not really for him to decide. That's his personal opinion. I think that there are people on the county commission that are very reasonable people, and they care about facts and return on investment and economic development and the vulnerable people in our community that rely on public transit. And so when I've had personal conversations with Josh, but not too many. And I think that there's common ground. I think that Josh is willing, he initiated the vote to widen 275 from Hillsborough to Bears. That project will cost $400 million. So he's obviously willing to pay, put taxpayer money into transportation solutions. But ultimately, we have to show that this is going to be beneficial. We're going to see a return on investment, that it's wildly popular, and has been for decades. And, that's our task as a transit advocacy organization.
And we got about 90 seconds here. We will say that heart ridership on Route 1 is up nearly 40% in April compared to last year, with like almost 140,000 trips taken in April alone. And so we're looking at about 5,153 riders. You mentioned BRT. We won't have time to get into it, what that threshold needs to be.
What about Crosstown Ferry? Can we mention that?
Oh, yeah, Crosstown Ferry. I think you guys were very excited about that. We don't know whether it's going to be one boat or two, but we need the feds now to approve a transfer of a federal grant from Hillsborough over to PSTA to revive that program. Somebody said it was a joyride. I think it was Commissioner King. What do you say to that, Dana, here in the next 45 seconds?
Most trips on our roadways or our transportation system in general are not commuter trips. And so would you call any car trip a joyride? I don't think it's quite fair to say that people that commute on the ferry aren't valuable in terms of they're taking cars off the road regardless of the reason. And so I'm really excited about having water transit, considering we've been surrounded by water forever. And it is a viable way to move people around. And that's what matters. And
Tampa used to have a very robust ferry system, actually, way back in the day, according to Rodney Kite Powell, director of the Touchstone Map Library at the Tampa Bay History Center. Heard him say that this morning. Dana, we could do a whole episode on this, and it sounds like we're going to have to. Dana Lazarus of Transit Now Tampa Bay. By the way, her group is going to do a group ride. It's an evening ride on Route 1 through South Seminole Heights. They're going to be at the Independent tonight. That's at Florida and Wilder, 6:30 p.m. It's a 2-hour ride. They're going to go down to Sparkman Wharf. There will be an elected official, Councilwoman Lynn Hertag, who kind of spearheaded the free Route 1. Dana Lazarus, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to have you on again soon to talk more transit, because obviously we could talk all day about this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
All right. Thank you, Dana. Yeah, it is a perennial issue, isn't it?
It's crazy. It's like we've been talking about it forever. Sunshine Citizens, Stop TBX.
I remember I moved here in 2000. That had just come from the Committee of 99. They called it, cheekily called it, from the 99 people they put on a committee in 1999, said that we need transit in Hillsborough County. And when I worked for Creative Loafing, that was the era where we thought we were going to get something done. We had 2010 Hillsborough, moving Hillsborough forward, transit tax that went down a defeat. 2014 Greenlight Pinellas went down a defeat. So that was the momentum we really had for, at least light rail. That
was such an interesting thing because the number one thing anybody complains about, I think, is traffic. And, a lot of people really do believe that improving public transit is key to reducing traffic.
Especially in the Tampa Bay area. I mean, one of the big issues that could make the life better.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. Mitch, I love seeing you, man. I'm glad, really grateful to all of our listeners last week who came through to us, who put us over the edge in the fund drive. If you haven't had a chance to donate to your favorite show, your favorite radio station on planet Earth, please do that. On behalf of myself, Ray Roa, Mitch Perry, my co-host here, Skip Sassy on the boards, Irene Matthews on the phones, WMNF Volunteer of the Year, by the way. Thank you so much for listening to WMNF Tampa. I saw Joellen Schilke in Studio One. She's here with Art in Your Ear. They're going to talk about all the beautiful things that are happening in our area. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great weekend, and thank you so much for listening.